Anybody, anywhere,
It's time to take command.
The Cardiac Commanders are the Clutch Commanders!
With former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen.
This pass caught by Paulsen, the tight end.
And from 106.7 The Fan, Grant Paulsen.
Welcome in to Take Command. However you found us, thank you for doing so. You can watch us on the 106.7 The Fan and 980 YouTubes. You can subscribe to our podcast and get the audio wherever you get anything that you listen to. It's Logan Paulsen, Grant Paulsen. We are here at least twice a week, and with games starting, we will be here 3 times a week moving forward. We're excited about that. Speaking of exciting, though, Logan, we got a 53-man roster. It is here. Adam Peters and the Commanders whittled their roster all the way down to 53, and I got to say, a little bit chalky. No huge surprises.
Yeah, no huge surprises, but I think it's, kind of how they handled the offseason. You could tell, like, some staffs around the league, they do a really good job of not really good job. It's just kind of there's no right way to do it, of identifying their roster, identifying their core early. And I think you saw that in some of the preseason games where you have 30 guys not playing, and it becomes very clear like how they view certain guys in comparison to other guys. And then you kind of look at the playtime metrics. And a guy that we're going to talk about a lot when we talk about the defense is Cleveland Farrell. Like, you could just tell that because of how he was playing in the preseason, there was a pretty good shot that he wasn't going to make the roster. So I just think this is how this team chose to handle it. And I think it's smart in some ways. I think in terms of like keeping guys healthy, keeping guys safe. And so, it was kind of pretty chalky, I guess, when you kind of come down to it.
It's funny that you put it that way, or interesting that you put it that way, because actually one of the words I would use is they seem pretty transparent with what they're thinking. Like, I've covered groups before where it's very cloak and dagger. And I remember times where, like, the part of the practice we're at, Mike Shanahan has starters going, and then we waddle up the hill to go sit down in the media room. And then other guys run out there. They're going to start on Sunday. Like, what we saw at camp, what fans saw, the usage in the preseason, the fact that, like, the only pick in the 2 years of the Peters era now in the front office that they released very early. So that guy, Dominique Hampton, could try to go get work. They kind of knew, hey, you're out. They told Brian Robinson before the final preseason game, this isn't looking good for you. I don't know how well that went. And next thing you know, there's a divorce. But, like, you get what I'm saying is it's not like they're playing games. And I kind of like that about how they operate.
Yeah, and I think back to my time in Atlanta with Dan, and he operated in a very similar way. It was like, this is how we view you now, and things can change, obviously. But I remember that was the first time in my career where I didn't play in a preseason game, was with Dan in Atlanta, because I was going to be the second kind of blocking Y tight end and didn't have anybody else on the roster that can do it. So he's like, you pretty much made the team. And so that is really helpful in certain situations with, like, a guy in my position, because I was like, oh, okay, now I can start prepping for week 1 and start working on these things. And it gave me a lot of confidence. But the next year, the shoe was on the other foot, and I was playing in a lot more preseason games, and I was like, this isn't looking good. And it kind of helps lay the landscape a little bit. So as a player, that can be difficult. But I think there are pros and cons to both, right? I think, Mike was always super paranoid about what the other teams knew or what they could glean from media availability of practice. So he was always kind of thinking about how to give, like, a false narrative to the media. And Dan, I think throughout, and Adam throughout, have been pretty transparent in how they're thinking about stuff. Like, that's one of the things I really appreciate about Dan in his press conferences. He's incredibly consistent. He's incredibly on message. And I think that's really helpful. Again, I think about it from a player's perspective. It's really easy because this is what we're talking about. Dan sets the narrative. I support it. And so I think it's great. I don't know if there's a right or wrong way to do it, but this is one way. And I think it's pretty effective for what they've done so far.
All right, so let's run through the 53 here. We'll go offense this segment, defense next segment, and then I want to get into some of the more interesting decisions and some practice squad stuff at the end of the pod on Take Command today. But we'll start on offense. Let's go to the quarterback room. The debate was 2 or 3. They did keep Josh Johnson as a third quarterback. It feels to me like the narrative out there is, well, maybe they would have gone outside the organization. You talked about maybe calling Jeff Driscoll and having him back in the conversation. Do we think that they're still doing some shopping there, or is that you move forward with 3? And how much of this is because of the Marcus Mariota Achilles being a question mark that you felt like you had to keep a third?
So let's break that up into two parts. Do I think they're still shopping? Yes, but I think Adam Peters is always shopping. I think that's one of the signs of a good GM, and one of the things that I've appreciated about him since the jump, pretty much, is he's all even last year with how he handled the practice squad. He views that in a very specific way. If I like my evaluation on a guy, if I think there's some talent there, let's get him in our building. And if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing on a practice squad, I have no problem moving on. I'm not tied to you. I want to make the best roster I can possibly make. And so I do think that this is to me, an indication of, I think they are confident that Marcus Mariota is getting healthier, but I think there probably is still some question or some reservation. And do I think Marcus plays week 1? Yes. But just in case there's a setback, just in case there's something going on, Josh Johnson, with his experience, has shown an ability to win NFL football games, and he can manage an offense. And there's something to having a backup on the roster that has that ability. Do I think they're still looking for somebody? Probably, right? I think they're probably looking for somebody who's maybe a little bit more talented, maybe a little bit more upside. But I think Josh Johnson, throughout his career, has shown I can run an offense. I can put us in good situations. I can, again, like, the operation is a big part of that. And so I think that's what you're looking at there, is you've got a guy you can trust while you are very confident that Marcus Mariota is going to be back.
9 starts, 45 games in the league over 9 seasons where he's gotten on the field. And obviously the 39-year-old's been in the league way more years than that. But that was maybe one of the surprises in terms of Johnson making the roster. I just have to assume that this is an insurance policy because they haven't seen Mariota do a whole lot. And maybe if he was completely healthy and had practiced throughout the process, Daniels and Mariota are plenty enough in terms of the active roster. You've got Sam Hartman back on the practice squad, and then they'd have a decision to make if the worst case scenario happened and you were going to tap into Hartman on the practice squad, or you could sign a street free agent or something at that point. But they're dealing with what is, not with maybe what they want to be, and that is that Mariota has that Achilles. All right, the running back room. After the Brian Robinson trade, which we've talked about on previous pods, he goes to San Francisco. This, to me, was kind of a foregone conclusion. I mean, you nailed this. This was Eckler in his role, third down, pass catching back, 2-minute, 4-minute, any kind of stuff at the end of halves. He's going to be out there. The big question, I guess, would be first and second down. Who's getting more carries in week 1? Who's getting more carries in week 10? And what does that look like for Ja'Cory Krosky, Merritt, and Chris Rodriguez? And then Jeremy McNichols, last man in.
Yeah, and I had some questions about whether they keep 3 here, but again, all those guys have had tremendous training camps, tremendous preseasons. Really, Austin hasn't done so much in terms of preseason games, but in terms of when he's at practice, he's always locked in. You see the explosiveness, you see the twitch, you see the ability to kind of run a more diverse route tree than most backs. Bill Merritt has been outstanding. I think people have kind of overhyped him to a point where I'm like, hey man, take it easy. He's still a rookie, but the talent is there, the physicality there, the acceleration, the deceleration, the creativity, the vision is there. And I think you see a new kind of modeled Chris Rodriguez, a guy that's in better shape, he's always been a physical runner, but the conditioning, the speed, the burst seems to be at a different level. And that's jumped out to me, honestly, since day 1 of training camp. And it's great that the fans and the people who aren't at practice every day get to see his ability in the game. So you mentioned there, like, who gets the carries week 1? To me, it's kind of scheme dependent, really. I think it's probably C-Rod early. That would be, if there's a betting line, I'd probably take the odds on that. But the thing is, I do think the more talented player is Bill Krosky Merritt. And I think at some point he's going to start getting more and more touches as they get more and more comfortable with his health and with his ability to kind of digest and handle the workload of an NFL running back. And obviously you mentioned McNichols, very consistent talent. I think there's talent there too. So I'm not going to hedge on that. He's a talented player, got great physicality, is a commander in the truest sense of the word. Competitive, tough, good on special teams, great in third down protection, runs like an absolute lunatic when he's in there. And so I think you've got a really nice room of guys that complement each other well, while also setting a really high floor for the position.
Yeah, the compliment is what I want to get into with Krosky, Merritt, and Rodriguez specifically. Merritt, who ran the 4.45 40, Rodriguez, who's a massive physical thumping presence. I mean, a 225-pound back who's improved his speed. The speed metrics that they chart are better this summer for him than they've been at any point in his career. And that's with some now, hits he's taken and wear and tear over 2 seasons, still in his prime at 24 years old. So you said it's based on scheme. Are you talking about defensively what they're looking at, or maybe what they want to do on offense, or both? And we're still learning, Bill, as Dan Quinn said a couple weeks ago here in DC. But what do you think Krosky Merritt's going to do well in terms of run game scheme stuff? And what do you think Rodriguez excels in based on what you've seen?
So I think that's really interesting. And we've talked about this a little bit on the last show. I think Bill's superpower is his vision, like his ability to kind of snake and set up blocks, especially at the second level, in terms of run game, right? That offensive lineman gets off that double team. You see backs oftentimes, they cut it back too early. They don't set that block up. The linebacker plays over the top and makes a tackle. I think he's at his best because he's really patient. He's going to press that block. He's going to bring that defender to the lineman. And then he's explosive enough and twitchy enough to make the cut. I think the other thing that's important to consider here, and we're going to talk about this more with the offensive line, is yes, the backs have pitches that they like to throw, right? C-Rod is this power, downhill, shoulder square kind of guy. There's a little bit more elusiveness to Bill Krosky Merritt. But I also think about the landscape of the offensive line that they've cultivated. They've got these big athletic bodies. And I think, what do you do with guys like that, especially in gun situations? Obviously, if you were under center more, you'd be running, inside zone. You'd be running outside zone. You'd be running stuff that is very akin to like Kyle Shanahan or even Mike Shanahan, the old Houston Texans kind of stuff. But because they're in the pistol, how do you create those angles? And a lot of it is pin pull stuff. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see who kind of asserts themselves in that pin pull department. Austin Eckler has been excellent with that when given opportunity over the last couple of years. I think I would assume Bill's good at it because of his speed, his ability to kind of get to the perimeter, change the angles, stress the defense horizontally, and then find the cutback. So if the game plan is kind of feeding into that offensive line strength of this pin pull perimeter run stuff, I would say Bill Krosky Merritt or Austin Eckler is going to get the first touch. But if we're going to start the game with a wham, a GT, a power, a trap, something that's more downhill, I want to see Chris Rodriguez do that, man, because the physicality that he ran with, especially on that second carry when they ran that influence trap in Cincinnati, I think speaks to his skill set at a really high level. So that's kind of what I'd say. It's not only the backs, it's also what you want to do with the offensive line, and then which player of those 4 if you include McNichols, maximizes the offensive line.
Just looking at his numbers, his first couple seasons in the league, Chris Rodriguez, each of the last 2 years has averaged sub 4 attempts per game in his role, when he's been elevated. So that number is obviously going to go up, and I can't wait for that. But his success rate as a ball carrier, which is viewed as getting 40% of a first down on 1st and 10, so 4 yards, 60% on second down, or 100% on third or fourth down of the yards needed, went from 47% in year 1 to 74% in year 2. He made a pretty violent leap. He averages just shy of 5 yards per carry in his career. So there's a reason why Brian Robinson's not here beyond whatever happened with B-Rob, and they have been intrigued by this guy for some time. All right, let's talk about the players in front of those running backs. They're going to be paving the way. Tight ends, I don't think we have to spend a lot of time on, but curious if you have a thought here. So Ertz, if and when healthy, should be one of the higher targeted tight ends in the league and does good things in line. John Bates, you've called one of the best blocking tight ends at this point in the National Football League. We're getting to a point with Ben Sinnott where, he could be helpful as a blocker, but you kind of want to see something as a pass catcher at some point. It's just a matter of will he get opportunities. That's probably Ertz dependent in some way. And then Colson Yankoff. He fought his way onto the roster at a 52-yard catch and run, is very good on special teams. I think we both had all 4 of these guys in, so no surprises, but what's your storyline here?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's Ben Sinnott in his development, because it was fun watching him this offseason because I do think he's improved. I think you see the inline stuff. You mentioned it. When I watched the Baltimore tape back, he's explosive, man. He's a strong kid. He really has a good coordination from his hips into the contact point of the block, which is really, really hard to teach and very, very hard to get a feel for as a player. Like I had to spend a lot of times hitting a sled to get that feel. And he just seemed to kind of intuit that. I think the thing where I want to see the development is you see him, he's fast. I see a twitch. I see a deceleration, acceleration, which mirrors and matches his force plate numbers that he did at the combine. However, the thing that I would point to is like there is a little bit of nuance there. Like I think back to the Cincinnati game where he's running that out route. And what I would say is like if I'm coaching Ben, and he's got a great coach in David Rye, who's a really smart dude. He coached me at UCLA. So all the respect for him, and I'm sure he's having this conversation with him, is on those routes, like take one more revolution. Like you're letting your depth be dictated by this defender. Push him deep, get him to open his hips on this spin route, the second in that he ran versus New England. Run through that ball. That might be a catch, even though Sam Hartman gets credited for a bad throw. I think that's also a little bit on Ben. So what I want to see is like that maturation as a route runner. And people are like, oh, well, he's a second round pick. He should already have that. When you watch his stuff at Kansas State, this was part of the story with him, is how is he going to develop and mature as a route runner? And it's cool to see the movement skills and the confidence starting to come along. Now it's just, can we put a little bit of polish on there? So maybe week 6, maybe week 7, you start to see a more confident version of Ben Sinnott, and he is getting more touches. And all of a sudden, this team goes from an 11, 12 personnel team. Maybe we get more 13 personnel in there, because I do think his movement skills indicate you can create matchups. Now, that's something I'm watching. That's a storyline I'm going to be following. But you mentioned Colson Yankoff. Got to shout him out real quick. Great on teams, explosive, twitchy, and I love that undrafted free agent guy. So I'm in on Colson Yankoff.
Weird that you like an undrafted free agent at a UCLA. I would not, that plays tight end. I would not have had that in the office pool. Before we move on really quickly, I mean, people that listen to this pod, almost all of them know, right? You talk about 11 personnel, it's a tight end, 12, 2 tight ends, yep. 13, 3 tight ends. But to go back to that, I was actually going to ask you, if you're Cliff, at what point do you decide, or is it just up to Ben that you one day just say, I can't not do this. I have to involve this guy. At what point do you say, all right, if Ertz is going to play and he's healthy, because when they had signed him at his age with his injury history, you kind of thought Sinnott's going to have to play a lot. Well, that certainly wasn't the case last year. Knock on wood. It won't be the case this year because Ertz will be out there. But in terms of him forcing his way onto the field or what have you, or just using more, even in 12 personnel, maybe Bates isn't out there. Is that too much of a tell? That's an obvious pass. I would say no, because both of those guys can block. But like, how do we get to that? Where the excuse or the explanation's a better word, no negative connotation. The explanation has been, well, look at Zach Ertz's numbers. Like, how are you going to get Ben Sinnott involved? At some point this year, I would like the second round pick to be like running routes and getting some balls thrown his way. How do we get there?
Yeah, so I think that's predicated on Ben and the confidence that Cliff has in him. And, you know, like I coach high school football. We talked about this the other day. Like one of the things that I value a lot as a play caller, and I valued a lot when I was a player in the league and coaches valued from me, is they could trust me, right? I knew the game plan. And I think there's an element of, like I just talked about, with some of that route running nuance is like, yes, you're explosive. Yes, you're strong. But can the quarterback trust that you're going to be on the right angle? I will tell you this about Zach Ertz, man. Everyone kind of wants to poo-poo. Like he has been, it's been a masterclass, man. And I nerd out about tight end play, but he has been so good at the fundamental stuff. And so it's like when you're watching him and this is the guy you can play, he's always in the right spot. He always creates separation, always is maybe being a little hyperbolic, but the nuance, the understanding, and the savviness is there every single time. And so I think you just need to see that metric come up for a little bit for Ben. And so how does he do that? In practice, like when it's his opportunity in team, Zach's going to take a rest day. Can I maximize those opportunities? When I'm doing the practice squad scout team look for the defense, can I show that I'm evolving as a route runner? Like I think about my development arc from 10 to 12, where I became a starter in 2012. A big part of that was what I did in practice on practice squad. Kyle would see me and be like, hey man, like you deserve more opportunity because you're blocking better. You're running to the right spots on routes. And that was a big deal for me in terms of when I finally got my opportunity. So I don't want to cast my story onto Ben, but I think that's what, if I was advising him, that's what I'd recommend is like, hey man, in practice, let's show that you know exactly what's going on. You can get to these spots. We see the athleticism. Now let's put that finishing polished touch on it and force Cliff to say, man, you're doing so well. I can no longer ignore this. We need to get you on the field more.
So the last time we saw Zach Ertz, as a reminder, 16 targets, 11 catches, 104 yards in the NFC Championship game.
Monster.
I mean, just a massive tight end performance. And in that game, oh, by the way, we got the Ben Sinnott moment we've been waiting for.
Yeah.
Off of the right arm, I guess, of Tressway, right? He's left-footed punter and right-handed thrower. He's like some quirky baseball player. All right, offensive line. Most of the interest, I think, was on the back of the roster. They went a little lighter at center in terms of depth. Does that tell you that maybe to start the season, Allegretti is not going to start at guard and maybe they kick Wiley in and have Connerly play every snap? Or am I reading too much into it?
No, I think that's probably what I would say is you've got two guys that I think, in Chris Paul and Wiley, who did really fantastic at guard this preseason. So now what I would say is the people often ignore this, people who aren't like super locked in, is that swing interior player is almost just as valuable as your starter. So now with Allegretti, I've got a guy who can play all three spots. I can play center, play both guard spots, and I've got two other guys that can have some position flexibility at the guard position also. So I think getting Allegretti, who's played a ton of football, we've gushed over him on this podcast numerous times, like good football player, smart guy, pro's pro. Like I love that he is in this mix and can kind of fill in any hole that it's presented. So I would say maybe, again, if I'm betting on this, I'd probably bet like, hey, you probably start Chris Paul or Wiley at one of these guard spots, the Sam Carsby right guard spot, and let Allegretti just kind of own that backup position role. But again, I think I'd be really comfortable with all of them playing because they did such a great job this offseason in terms of developing. So, feel really good about that group, feel really good about that interior, feel really good about the depth. And I'd say ever so slightly, Nick Allegretti is probably going to back up because of that ability to play center.
As far as the reserves go, I just want to go back to someone you mentioned, Chris Paul, who was a 7th-round pick way back in 2022. He has been a survivor, man. I mean, when you're a 7th-round pick, you're fighting an uphill battle to make a roster. I remember his first camp wondering, if he was going to be on the team. And then you fast forward multiple regimes later and 4 football seasons later, and it just seems like he keeps getting better. He has not really ever been a guy you go into the year feeling like you want to play 17 games. But I think you'd be comfortable with him filling in for a game or two here. I mean, he's gotten to a point now, and he's earned it all. He's worked for it with a group that didn't even draft him that I think trusts him.
And it's a testament to him, man, because when he came in, he was athletic, he was powerful, but there was a lot of nuance that was lacking from his game in terms of run blocking posture, pass protection feel, understanding more complicated pass protection principles. And every single year, he's gotten better and better and better and better. And watching him in this preseason, I feel like he's taken maybe the biggest jump of his career. Like his feel in pass pro, he understands his footwork, he's understanding angles really well, and his strength and his explosiveness is so tremendous. So he's built himself. He's been given this opportunity, and he's constantly getting better and constantly improved. So hats off to him, man. Like he looked like a totally different player. Like if you watch his film from 4 years ago and watch the film of this offseason, it doesn't even look like the same guy. So huge props to him, man. Really happy that he's made these types of improvements.
26-year-old former 230th overall pick, Chris Paul, who's got a brother in the National Football League as well, and 17 games and 18 starts in now. Just keeps getting better, to your point. I mean, how rare is that, by the way, that in year 4 you see that leap? Like that normally happens sooner or doesn't happen, right?
For whatever reason, offensive linemen, there's like a year 3 bubble. Like when you look at the analytics, and PFF puts this out and they're using their metrics. So take that for what it's worth. But usually you see a pretty significant grade spike in year 3. And I think it goes back to just the importance of repetition at that position. You need to understand it's a strength-based, power-based position, but there's also a feel and an understanding and a nuance there that I think a lot of people don't understand. And so as you get more reps and as you spend more time in these more complicated pass protection schemes, in these more complicated run schemes, you see these developments with offensive linemen. So maybe he's a year late, quote unquote, but I think, yes, you're seeing a really nice progression from him. And I think that's also a credit to Coach Johnson and that offensive line staff, because you see their ability to encourage improvement in players.
Cosme will be eligible to come off of PUP after 4 games. So potentially would miss Giants, Packers, Raiders, Falcons, and then could be back for the Chargers on the road and play his first home game against the Bears in early October. Whether that happens or not, we'll see what kind of benchmarks he can hit along the way. Lastly, we've gone a little long on offense, but I wanted to hit every position with some detail here. Wide receivers. So this is the prediction that you made, right? That a sixth guy would not be kept. Nobody had separated themselves, and that they would shop around. They did not claim anybody, which is different than saying that they didn't put in a claim. When you're really good and you get to a conference championship game, you have 29th in the waiver order. So they weren't able to land anybody. We don't know if they attempted to. But do you think that a wide receiver is going to be brought in here in the next 24 to 48 hours to add to this group of 5?
I would think so. And again, maybe they've already tried to do that, like you said, but it just seems like because of the style of offense you want to play, the hurry up, the depth that they got to last year, that you're going to need another body here at some point. So I don't know if they're thinking early on in the season we'll just elevate from practice squad, but it seems like they need an extra body, and we'll see what happens. But I know they're going to be working hard to find the best possible person to fill that spot.
Terry McLaurin met with the media for the first time since getting his deal, was on the practice field, which was great to see on Wednesday. Noah Brown, who we saw do a pretty extensive workout and work up a lather before the preseason game, was on the practice field as well. I'm not a doctor. He looks like he's running and cutting pretty well, though. That's very encouraging.
Yeah, he looked great. Even I think he came to a couple practices early in the offseason. I was like, man, he looks like he's in great form, great shape. So whatever's going on, they haven't really specified exactly what's going on with the injury, but I think he's in great shape, and he looks like he's ready to play some football. So the big knock on him is it's never been his competitiveness, it's never been his toughness, it's never been his ability to play the sport. It's just about, can he stay healthy? And I think this staff's doing everything they possibly can to make sure that he's healthy and ready for a long 17-game season.
All right, so that's the offensive side of the equation. Let's dig into who made the roster on defense. We'll do that next on Take Command. Welcome back to Take Command. Logan Paulsen and Grant Paulsen with you, working our way through the 53-man roster formed by Adam Peters, Dan Quinn, and the Commanders brass. All right, Logan, let's start on the D-line, where I thought maybe some of the most interesting decisions were made. I would have lost a lot of money on the idea, not only that Cleveland Farrell got cut, that one wasn't stunning to me, but if you told me Farrell was out and Carl Davis was out, and you had
Jalen
other
Holmes,
like bubble players like Jalen Holmes that all didn't make it. We're kind of picking between Holmes, and none of them got in. They went lighter there.
Yeah, they went lighter. They went 8 because they count Von Miller as a linebacker, but I'm going to count him as a defensive lineman here for this conversation. But
am I wrong, or I think I saw this somewhere? He's being listed as a linebacker exclusively because of the number he's wearing.
Is that right? I don't know if that's true or not.
I saw something quirky. Like, I think it was Nikki Javala had that at some point, that like that's by definition what they're doing, but obviously he's a defensive lineman.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. But anyway, number semantics aside,
right.
But like, Dorrance Armstrong, Daron Payne, Javon Kinlaw, Von Miller, that felt like a pretty solid starting group there. Dietrich Wise was going to make it. Jazon Newton was going to make it. Jacob Martin maybe is a little bit of surprise, but as you and I talked about, like, that was something that I felt was going to happen. I thought he had a really good offseason and kind of showed his impact was going to be positive as a pass rusher. I thought he did a great job on first and second down as well. So a really nice depth beat. I think the first kind of slight surprise was Eddie Goldman. And because we talked about how Carl Davis had a good camp, Shelton Day had a good camp, Jalen Holmes had a good camp, and had he separated himself enough from them. And I think when you look at it and you go back and watch the film of the preseason, you see a guy who's maybe not as good as he once was, but there's still a little bit more twitch than Carl Davis. There's still a little more size than Jalen Holmes. I think you probably feel like he gives you a little bit more flexibility on first and second down if you wanted to stunt and move that nose guard position. And again, so am I totally shocked that he made it? No, but slightly, because I thought those other guys played really well. And I think this helps illuminate how difficult this decision can be. And then Jean-Baptiste, they love him in the building, and he deserves that love. I was a little bit unsure because of the injury history, but I had to make it ultimately, and ultimately he's here on the roster. So
One guy that I've talked to you a lot about off the pod and brought up a few times on the pod is Jacob Martin. I think he's going to be an important member of this rotation on pass rushing downs. I'm also fascinated to see, we talk about the tweener, like, are you an end? Are you a linebacker? And how things are listed. And by the way, research department for Take Command says, yeah, you're not allowed to wear 24 as a defensive lineman, which is dumb. So that's literally the only reason that he's being listed anywhere as a linebacker, is bookkeeping purposes, basically.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so that's a dumb thing that we should change in the NFL. But anyway, I think they're going to use Frankie Louvu at the line of scrimmage more often than they did last year. What's your thought on A, the idea of that, and B, do you think we'll see that?
It's funny. I think they will. I think we'll see him do that, rushing from the edge, because I think that adds value. I think we've talked about this before. The ability to take a player that's listed as a linebacker, like Frankie is, and have him in certain down and distances be a defensive end, it does force a lot more communication from the offensive line and the running backs and the tight ends in a pass protection situation. I've said this before, but I've been in meetings before where we're going through a protection meeting and they're like, hey guys, and this is 10, 15 minutes of a protection meeting where we got to start talking about blitz patterns and pickups and our rules. And they go through and they're like, hey, on 3rd and 5+, this person is considered a defensive end. And the fact that you now have a player in this defense who forces teams to waste reps and waste time talking about movement in the defense, I think is really valuable. However, I do think Frankie's best usage to me is as a blitzer. I think he's fine on the edge, but I think this is where Jacob Martin, Von Miller, Dorrance Armstrong kind of come into this conversation in a nice way, is if I can get Frankie Louvu to kind of be this spinner, movable chess piece, and I can get him on a running back, that's the matchup I want. Based on preseason, I want Dorrance Armstrong on a guard. I want Von Miller on the edge. I want Jacob Martin on the edge. I want Kinlaw or Deron Payne at the 3 technique, and I want Frankie Louvu to run through the running back's face. And I think that, to me, is a formidable 5-man pressure because of matchups, because of skill set. And so, yeah, could you put Frankie on the edge? Absolutely. But I think if I'm trying to maximize, in my opinion, what these guys' skill sets are, that's how I would do it.
So that's his greatest strength. I don't think there's any debate. I wonder if they can't get enough pass rush from their edge guys, if that's the solution. Now, they'll probably tell you that they feel good about this, right? Von Miller is going to be their closer. He's Mariano Rivera in the 4th quarter, hopefully. Dorrance Armstrong came on like gangbusters. People forget the playoff run he was having. Not that quietly, by the way. He had like 3.5 sacks down the stretch. I mean, he was very, very loud in January. And so if they feel like Armstrong and then some version of Jacob Martin and Von Miller, maybe it's Javonte Jean-Baptiste at times, if they can get enough rush off the edge, then what I'm worried about doesn't come to fruition. But I view Miller as someone that he's not going to play a ton of snaps, right? You're just hoping for a high efficiency and that he has that high pass rush win rate. Last year, he was the fastest off the ball at his position still, which is, that is designing a laboratory stuff at his age, the best time off the ball in your mid-30s. So I still think there's juice there, but I'm wondering down in, down out, pressure off the edge, if they don't have enough. To me, Louvu, arguably their best pass rusher. And so do you just inevitably have to use him some in that way?
I see what you're saying. I think that's definitely a possibility. Again, I believe in Jacob Martin. I believe in Vaughn. I believe in Dorrance and their ability to rush the passer. And so we'll for sure see Frankie there. I just think those guys, from what I've seen this offseason, are at a level that I wasn't expecting. And so
they've got enough then. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think. And I think, you talk about Vaughn only having to play a certain amount of snaps. I think that's where Dietrich Wise comes in and why he's going to be such an effective addition here, because I don't have to worry about him on 1st and 2nd down because Dietrich Wise is excellent on 1st and 2nd down. So we can save him for those Mariano Rivera type closing moments. And again, I think we'll still see him there because I think his flexibility is, again, one of his superpowers in addition to rushing the back. I just think if I had a choice, if I had to make a decision, I want him in that role in those moments because I don't know if there's a running back in the league that can block him.
Stopping the run was an undoing defensively last year. Saquon Barkley and Philly, specifically in those 3 matchups, pretty indicative of some deficiencies they wanted to iron out and figure out this offseason. Do we think they did enough? What's that look like for you? And if they are now going from bad against the run last year to good, what does that look like and who helps them?
So this is one that I've thought about because I think a lot of people have come up to me like, oh, they had a hard time stopping the run. Cincinnati was able to run the ball a little bit. Baltimore was able to run the ball a little bit. I think every decision that they've made on first and second down in terms of addition on defensive line is to support Bobby Wagner. Because when you go back and watch Bobby from this last year, everyone's like, oh, is he as good as he once was? The answer is obviously no, because he's a Hall of Fame player and he's, what is he, 34 years old. But I think the thing that I would point to is when the defensive ends set good edges and the defensive tackles can hold point, he will make every single tackle. If those four guys in the front can do that, you're going to be fine. So what do? You got to get Dietrich Wise. He's great at setting edges. Dorrance Armstrong, sneaky good at that. You got Kinlaw and Duran, who are going to eat up double teams and penetrate and be disruptive and set nice violent edges. I remember watching the Tampa Bay playoff game, and Bobby has this great tackle. I think it's like the second or third play of the game. And the tackle is made because Duran is absolutely chinning the guard. And so I look at that and I say, you've done this to make sure that Bobby can get to every single tackle you need. And that's where I say, like, maybe you didn't see that efficiency in the preseason, but Bobby didn't play one snap in the preseason. And so when he gets out there, him and Frankie Louvu, Tyler Owens as the big nickel, Mike Sanders still in the slot, all those guys are great tacklers. We've seen Quan tackle well. Will Harris has been excellent as a tackler. I just think because that group has just gotten more consistent, like their batting average has gone up, it's going to help the second level of defense and then the third level of defense when it comes to stopping the run. So that's what I think this ultimately looks like heading into week one. And I think it's important to also point out they were like 30th or 31st in run stopping efficiency last year. I don't know, maybe you can look that up, Grant, but if they get to 16th, they've eliminated so much variance defensively and gotten so much better just by improving by that margin.
So looking at the linebackers, natural transition, then you were talking Wagner, we've talked Louvu. They end up keeping 6 technically if you count Nick Ballore, who's effectively a specialist. He's kind of like a fourth specialist. So really it's the 5 then with Jordan McGee. Our guy Ale Cajo makes the team as a college free agent. And then the 6th round pick, his college teammate at UCLA, Kane Medrano, is also on the roster. Feels like Ken Norton Jr. had some influence with 2 of his guys that he knew well from school on the back end of the roster, but they both earned it. Do you envision roles for either of them right away? I mean, is Medrano a guy that you think's important on teams against the Giants?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think the guy that the staff seems to be the most in love with is Jordan McGee. I think they want him to get on the field, and I think when you watch that Baltimore game, I think Kane's had a really nice preseason. There's a little bit lacking in terms of physicality, but that was part of the criticism in college. When you watch Kane, there's a little bit lacking in terms of coverage ability, but you see the physicality, the downhill nature. Jordan McGee is a maniac. Like you could tell he plays the way like God intended linebackers to play, right? Like that's what he does, right? I'm fast downhill. I'm aggressive to the football. There's people standing around the pile. I'm a heat-seeking. He reminds me of guys that you hated playing against because you're in the pile, you're fit up on a block, and all of a sudden you just get ear-holed by this third party, and you're like, what are you doing? And it's Jordan McGee. And so I love that energy. And so I think if anybody's going to get a package, it's going to be Jordan McGee. And I think that 4th spot, to me, it'll be interesting to see who can kind of differentiate themselves on teams and who can kind of mature the most there. Because they bring in Duke Riley in camp because they felt like they were lacking on teams. But can Ale Cajo differentiate himself, or is it Kane? Like Kane's the better mover, but who plays better on teams? Because that's going to dictate who's up. And then who's ever up on game day will kind of fill that package, quote unquote.
We talked about it in the last pod, but the undrafted free agent balling out in August, making the squad. How can you not be romantic about football? That's what we love, man.
And they went to UCLA, dude. What are we talking about here? This is like
this is Logan Paulsen season right now. SEN, let's go. Lastly, the secondary. Put a bow on the defense. There wasn't a whole lot here.
This was the most chalky position group.
Yeah, well, it didn't end up being interesting, but that's probably a good sign. They're immensely improved at corner. We kind of knew what that was going to look like with Amos and Sandra still and Lattimore starters. Sandra still in the nickel. There was this story out there that they were shopping Noah Igbenogany. Not sure if they were or weren't. He's on the roster. Jonathan Jones, the only question's been health. He's played a ton in the league. Will help them if he's on the grass. And then safety, we both feel like it's one of their more underrated positions right now with Harrison Martin starting. Butler and Reeves' speed and physicality off the bench, and then Owens, who's proven he can play on teams. So they keep the 10 that kind of made sense. And the only question was, would they keep one of the young guys maybe and lose another player elsewhere? They didn't do that.
And they were able to get a lot of those younger guys to practice squad, which we're going to talk about here in a second. But it's interesting. When you went through the safeties, all of those guys I think are going to have a role on game day, whether it's on teams or whether it's in specific packages. Like I think about Tyler Owens in the Baltimore game versus Cincinnati. He's the big nickel. And again, they were kind of navigating some stuff. Mike Sanders still had to play on the perimeter. But I think that's a really interesting storyline to kind of keep an eye on this year. Jeremy Reeves, when you talk to coaches about him, their eyes just light up. And rightfully so. I mean, when you watch him play, he plays the game the way it's supposed to be played. He plays violently, physically, with great intelligence, great communication. So he's going to play on defense this year, I'm sure of it, right? And you talk about those two starting players and Percy Butler, they've had great off seasons as well. So for a position group that no one is really talking about outside of the local market, I think that's going to be a really sneaky, effective position. And you mentioned the cornerbacks. Like, think about how different the landscape of that group looks last year compared to this year. They've done a great job of getting experienced, competent play and competent depth, which is extremely hard to do at the cornerback spot.
The 53 formed by the Commanders. There's your breakdown on the defensive side of the ball. We'll look at some of the practice squad decisions that they made. We'll do that next on Take Command. Welcome back, Take Command. Logan Paulsen, Grant Paulsen. Our pick segment is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. Looking at the playoff odds for the Commanders right now, they've got them on FanDuel at minus 122 with Terry McLaurin in the fold, an offense that looks like it could be elite again, Jaden Daniels at the controls, and a much improved secondary. I don't see why this team, after 12 wins a year ago, even with a more complicated schedule, shouldn't be expected to be back in the wild card mix. I don't think they win 12 games. I've got them around 10 wins, but I do think they're a wild card team, minus 122 value. So a futures bet there on the Commanders makes some sense to me. I know the schedule's tough for Logan, but they are more talented than they were a year ago.
Yeah, and I think, we didn't really talk about it in great detail at the top, but I think with the improvement on the offensive line, the improvement at the defensive level, you mentioned the secondary. If they can just get to average in some of those statistical categories that they were poor in last year, I think it's well within the realm of possibility that they're a playoff team, even likely in some cases.
Our pick segment brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. The practice squad has been formed. I'll get to some of the standout names, but the one thing I want to start with is Sam Hartman, because at quarterback, I think that got the most headlines. There was a lot of fan frustration with his performance in the preseason. I found it interesting. The last time we did the pod, you watched the tape. You said, I don't know if people will love this, but it hasn't been nearly as bad as everybody thinks.
Right.
I mean, the idea is he's here. He's Jaden's buddy. He's good in the room. And there's also value to that, by the way. When I watch Hard Knocks in December, when the Commanders are one of the teams on HBO's Hard Knocks for the NFC East, we're going to see Sam Hartman and the quarterbacks exchanging gifts. He's going to look handsome doing it. They're all going to be having fun. He's a vibes guy. But there's a little bit more to it than that, too. And the cynicism of fans maybe misses out on. They don't see the whole story when they see the pick six or some of the interceptions.
Yeah, and let's talk about Sam for a second, because I had a conversation with one of my friends about this, and I got the film out and I was showing him, so we're going through all his plays, and I'm like, every one of these decisions with the football, minus the pick six, is the correct decision, right? He throws a ball to Moore up the sideline, he kind of drops it. He throws a slant to a receiver, and the receiver, to my eye, doesn't run a great route, and the DB's able to cut it off. He's down in the red zone. He ends up taking a sack. One of the receivers on the perimeter doesn't run the right route, at least to my eye. He's expecting something different. And so to me, if you understand the offense and the ball's going where it should go, that's 90% of the quarterback battle. When you're coaching quarterback, when you're watching quarterback, when you're talking quarterback play, that's one of the things that makes Jaden Daniels so excellent, is he understands the offense well enough that he understands where the ball should be going. And so I look at Sam and I'm like, he's making the right decisions. And I think you're probably hoping that after the shoulder surgery, he's going to get healthy. And then the ball velocity, which is somewhat lacking, gets back to what it was. And he never had the strongest arm, but gets back to approximately what it was when he was in college. So I think I'm not here to defend Sam Hartman saying he had this amazing preseason, but I think when you sit down and you watch the tape, you're kind of like, this isn't as bad as it felt. This definitely isn't bad as it looked on first glance. Because I'm with 90% of the fans. When I first watched, I'm like, man, this is a tough day for Sam. When you go watch the film, you're kind of like, I like this decision. Ball's in a good spot. We got to make this. And so leaving the film, I said, okay, I understand why he's here on the practice squad.
It feels fixable when you watch it back.
Correct. Yes.
The first time you're going, all right, this is not going to play. This does not work in this league. And then you go back and there's more good than you think. Makes a lot of sense to me. Other practice squad names, we can kind of go rapid fire here, but undrafted free agent out of Louisville, Ja'Cory Brooks got off to a great start in camp. Most catches and yards against the Patriots. He is still in the building. I thought if they kept a sixth, maybe he'd be the guy, but that's a great thing. He's going to continue to be a part of this, and the practice squad matters. I mean, you are still on this roster. You're on the team, and you're a Saturday promotion away from getting a chance on a Sunday at some point.
Yeah, I think a guy that showed a lot of upside. Again, I think there's some refinement, some maturity that needs to happen. He strikes me as this guy that started really hot in the beginning and then kind of cooled. And with rookie players, you almost want it to go the other way. You want it to go the Ale Cajo route, where it's as more offense goes in, as things get more complicated, as the competition ramps up, I just get better at each one of those steps and one of those integrations. And I felt like Ja'Cory, while he started great, kind of cooled, and I think this is a good spot for him to continue to develop. And I'm excited to see if at some point this year he's playing some ball on Sundays.
I thought Lawrence Cager had a good camp, the tight end, Baltimore, Maryland native. He has played in 21 games in the league, caught 19 passes, and caught a couple touchdowns. He's still in the organization, so they've got 5 tight ends. How much did you notice him at practice?
I think you feel him. I think you feel his athleticism. And someone was asking me, like, what is the thing that defines a good F or a good NFL tight end? And what I would say, it's your ability to win one-on-one matchups. So John Bates does that in the run game. Ben Sinnett's starting to do that more in the run game. Zach Ertz does that very, very well. One of the better guys in the league in the pass game. And I think you felt Lawrence Cager's movement skills in the pass game in a very unique way to him this year. And I think if you're looking for someone that maybe can develop, and I know he's a little bit older, this is year 5 or 6 for him, if I'm not mistaken. If you're looking for a guy to develop that high-level man-to-man movement, route running ability, I think he felt like the natural choice there.
Jets, Browns, Jets, Giants, over 5 years, to your point, 28 years old, so he's bounced around a little bit. Michael Dieter still in the building. There's your center depth. We talked about, Allegretti's going to be a backup center and then play both guards. What about in the secondary? Antonio Hamilton Sr., Carlin Vigors, who we heard was maybe a bubble guy early in camp. Darius Rush they signed even a day later. Anything stand out to you there?
I think both those guys had great camp. I think the guy that I'm most excited about long-term prospects isn't a corner, it's a safety. It's definitely Robert McDaniel, the small school. I think he was HBCU, if I'm not mistaken. But he basically played like on-ball defensive end / linebacker in college, and they're transitioning him to safety. And it was crazy watching his college film, because there's a game where he's in this kind of stand-up edge player role, and then he's covering receivers the next snap because they had an injury at corner. So obviously the ability to play man coverage as a corner, the physicality in the run game. And the thing, again, with him is it started really quietly, really slow. But as camp went on, you started to see the improvement. And with a guy who's almost 6'3", 215, 220 pounds, who can play with that physicality, has the arm length, has the 40 time in the athletic measurements. Like, he's someone that you're kind of like, developmentally, can you figure it out going from a small school competition to this? It feels like probably, and I'm really excited to see what he does this year.
Yeah, Jackson State product, and a great find for them. I mean, those are those. I know everyone gets found now, essentially, but that's a job well done by a scouting department when a guy comes in and looks the way he did throughout this process. Anything else notable you wanted to hit here on the practice squad receiver? They did keep a veteran in Chris Moore. They also have Jacoby Jones to go with Brooks. On the defensive line, Sheldon Day is still in the building, played really well at points at the point of attack in the second half of last season at D tackle.
Yeah, and I was going to say those 3 veterans, the Chris Moore, the Jalen Holmes, and the Sheldon Day, are guys that I'm excited to see still on the roster. Moore had a tough preseason, but I think you see a guy who's played a lot of football, has the experience. I think it's kind of going through like a little bit of a yips type of deal in terms of catching the football, because early in his career, that wasn't really an issue. So hopefully he gets that worked out. But a guy I think you can count on to play professional football on Sundays and not sweat a beat about it. We've seen Sheldon Day be incredibly productive. We've seen Jalen Holmes do it. So if we had to elevate anybody, like that would be a great opportunity for that. So I'm really excited to see those depth pieces are still here. And then a sneaky one is Timothy McKay, the offensive guard. He tore his pec at his pro day. To me, probably would have been a 4th, 5th round, 6th round type pick in that range. I think he's a good athlete, great athletic upside. Also, you talk about sneaky finds. Feels like a good find as a guy that you can kind of develop and maybe ends up playing some football for you down the road.
From a 10,000-foot view standpoint on this roster, before we go, they are the oldest team in the league, and it's not that close, right? Now you could say, oh, well, your punter's old, or some of these positions, your third string quarterback's 39. And if you're going to take those guys out, you'd have to do that with every team, and then everybody's average changes, right? But I saw a guy named Jimmy Kempski who does all this age evaluation stuff, who's been doing this for 12 years, say that this is actually the oldest roster that he's seen in dating back to when he started doing this in 2012, so 13 football seasons, at a little over 28 years old. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's like a half year older than any other team in the NFL. The Commanders, as an example, have 25 players that are 29 or older on the roster. The Packers have 4, just as a juxtaposition. So right. I guess my question to you is, either by way of injury concern or recovery from injuries or anything else, does that bother you at all?
It is something that I think you need to be aware of. Does it bother me? No. I think partially because of how they handled it last year. And I go back, this is an underrated part of football, but when you have a coach in Dan Quinn who understands seemingly like the way he structures practice, the way he gives guys rest days, the way he handles vet days in general, who understands how to handle older players, in conjunction with a really smart strength conditioning staff, I think you can mitigate some of that risk. Is there always inherent risk to football with injuries? Absolutely. That's totally outside of your control. Absolutely. But I think they've shown, given last year, that they really understand how best to manage some of these older players. And quite frankly, I mean, you were out at camp. I don't think I've seen Zach Ertz look this good in probably 3 or 4 years. Like, he looks tremendous. And I give this staff a lot of credit for that. Bobby Wagner looks in tremendous shape. So you get some of these older players, and if you know how to manage them, and if you know how to handle their workloads and trust that they're going to be able to get ready for Sundays, and again, they're playing critical positions, so it's going to be a big deal how well they manage these things. It's going to be a big deal, so I'm excited to see how they handle it. I think they're going to handle it the right way. Yeah, so is it a concern? Yes. But do I think they can manage and mitigate some of that risk? Yes.
Take command. Next time you hear from us, we will be previewing week 1 of the National Football League season.
Crazy, dude.
The Commanders and the Giants. Let's do this thing for real, Logan. Enough of the preseason stuff. Going to be fun. We will be back with you on Take Command next week, getting ready for the Giants. For Logan, I'm Grant saying so long. Watch us, YouTube, Team 980, 106.7 The Fan. Listen wherever you get your audio. Thanks much, and looking forward to chatting with you guys again in week 1 on Game Week.